Hi guys, welcome to the 7th lesson of our resource management topic. Today we're going to be looking at the factors which affect water availability. Now, a lot of the things that come up in this lesson do overlap things we've done previously on this topic. So hopefully a lot of it should start to ring a bell, and hopefully we should start to be able to make the connections of really what this topic is trying to get at. As always, what I'd like to do is I'd like to watch this video, and at the end there will be 3 review questions. In those 3 review questions, I'd like to upload your answers to them onto my homework so that I can have a little look through them at a later date. So, we've done an awful lot about water so far. We know that water is essential to life, but water stress threatens supplies. And in my last lesson, I told you all about how the demand for water is increasing quite dramatically across the world. The consumption of water is increasing quite dramatically, and therefore there are going to be problems associated with that. Now, today we are looking at a world in which there is a large amount of water scarcity. So around 1,700 million people still suffer from it. By 2025, 1.8 million people will be living in countries or regions with absolute water scarcity, and 2/3 could be living under water stress conditions. And what this means is that because our supply is being outstripped by demand, that is going to have a really big problem and could lead to water stress. This links in with climate change, and so a lot of areas, in particular in Africa, will be living under high water stress by 2030, and sub-Saharan Africa has the largest number of water-stressed countries of any region. So geographically, this is not going to be an even distribution of water scarcity and stress. It will be focused in certain countries, and in particular sub-Saharan Africa. So, as always in geography, we're going to look at exactly why water availability is such a problem. Now, like I said at the start of the lesson, we've looked at this in varying degrees across this unit, and to be honest with you, a lot of it links in with stuff we've done throughout the whole of geography. So there will be a lot of links here to other topics we have studied, which is partly why I like this topic, but also it should help you kind of make those connections a little bit faster than you would otherwise. So again, because it's geography, we're going to be looking at both physical and human factors about why the water is so hard to access. So we'll start off with some physical factors. There are 3 main ones, and they are geology, climate, and rivers. So, in terms of geology, it essentially affects where the water is stored and the location of aquifers and groundwater. Now, aquifers and groundwater are those big supplies of fresh water that we then extract our water from. And essentially, where rocks are impermeable, the water remains on the Earth's surface, and it remains in rivers, and that is transferred elsewhere. So, for example, if rain falls on impermeable rock, it does not seep into the ground. It will eventually flow to the nearest river, where it is then transferred to somebody else. Whereas, if the rocks are permeable, the water will go through them, the water will infiltrate into the ground, and then it might be moved by underground rivers, or it will be stored. And that's really, really important, because if we have a lot of permeable rock, it means that the water is not always easily transferable. So where we've got countries that don't have major rivers, but have a large amount of these permeable rocks, they might end up in water stress because they're not able to move that water elsewhere, and vice versa. If you've got a lot of impermeable rocks and the water is constantly being transferred elsewhere by rivers, the rain that falls in your country or your region might not necessarily stay in that region particularly long, and that could obviously, physically you can't really change that, and that could impact the availability of the water. A second factor, and this is pretty much always a factor really, is climate. And essentially, to make it really simple, I've just gone for, this is the key information, areas with low rainfall, low groundwater supplies, and few lakes generically find it difficult to access water. It's not readily available. If there's arid conditions, that means that precipitation is low. It might be hot quite a lot of the time, and therefore they're simply not getting access to that fresh water, which can have a really quite a large problem for that country in the long term as well. And then the final physical factor is looking at a river. And again, river systems move huge quantities of water from where it falls as rain towards seas and lakes. River systems can dry up in arid zones, so can be unreliable as source of water. Now, again with these rivers, pretty much the entire of human civilization has been built up around the flow of rivers. You think of ancient Egypt along the Nile, you think of London with the Thames, you think of Liverpool with the Mersey. And that has always been the case, but rivers aren't as reliable as we think they are. In a lot of places around the world now, rivers are drying up, or they actually are reducing in size. So as a river might have enough water to sustain 10 million people 1 year, the next year it might only have half that amount of water. So you can see how that would cause availability problems. Equally, a lot of rivers do not just flow through one country. In bigger continents like Africa and parts of Asia, that river might run through several different countries. And when that river is in an arid zone, so a hot and dry region, it might dry up. And that would have consequences for that country and also people who are further down that river as well. So rivers play a really, really important role. And if rivers start to dry up, we're going to see an increase in the amount of water stress as a direct result. Okay, so we also have some human factors. Now, these human factors we have definitely looked at across the last year or two, and they are water pollution, over abstraction, and we definitely looked at that a few lessons ago, and infrastructure and poverty. Now, again, a lot of these factors I think are quite common sensey, but it's good to know exactly what they are. So if an exam ever asked you what human factors were affecting resource availability, you would talk about one of these three. If it was physical, you talk about the last three. If it's a combination of the both, you kind of combine the six together. And essentially, water pollution is probably one of the main factors. So human activity can pollute both water and groundwater supplies, and there's loads of different reasons. We've got discharge of untreated raw sewage from houses and factories that can cause cholera, hepatitis, and typhoid, all particularly nasty diseases. So if you're in a village in India and you don't have a proper sewage system, your waste, your human waste, your medical waste might go straight into a river, straight into a water resource that is then drunk by other people, which can cause some pretty nasty disease. Factories cause chemicals and heavy metals to be dumped into water, like lead and cadmium. And essentially, if you go to places like China in the Pearl Delta region, a lot of the rivers around places like Shenzhen are very, very, very polluted with things like heavy metals. If you were to drink from that water, again, it leads to a higher likelihood of you becoming ill in the future, etc. And then finally, we've got agricultural runoffs, and that basically means that when we have the agriculture, when we have farming, they use things like pesticides and fertilizers. And when those fertilizers and pesticides run off into the river, they can either kill the aquatic life, which is what the pesticides do, or the fertilizer. Essentially, what happens is the fancy word is eutrophication. But when that fertilizer ends up in the river, it basically causes all the algae on the river to grow, because the fertilizer is like a plant growth, isn't it? It enables plant growth. And so that algae used to fertilizer gets really, really thick, covers all the lake, and eventually just consumes all the oxygen in it. So all the actual creatures in that lake or river will die off, which is a really pretty big issue. Over abstraction is the word we use when water is being used more quickly than it is being replaced. This exists where water demand is greater than supply. Now, we looked at this in the last lesson, and I'm not going to go into this in too much detail now, but the idea is that we know our world population is increasing. As our world population increases, our demand for water increases, and as we get more demand, because of all these factors we've looked at today, we are now entering a time when water demand is greater than supply, and over abstraction basically means if I am producing 10 litres of water a day and I'm using 12 litres of water a day, you can see why that would lead to a problem in the long term. And if I only have 100 litres of water, it's going to be used up a lot faster than it would have been in the past. And then finally, is this thing called water infrastructure and poverty. Now, infrastructure is this kind of buzzword in geography that refers to anything that enables the functioning of society, so the structural function of society. So this is the pipework, the cleaning facilities, the waste treatment plants, the pumps, the storage facilities, and essentially all that costs lots of money, and many HICs can afford this infrastructure. So in the UK, we do have facilities for cleaning. We have all the pipe work. We have waste treatment plants, pumps, and storage facilities. But people in many poorer countries in LICs, this isn't always possible. And so the problem is, as we've looked at in the past, it's not getting the water, it's having the infrastructure to be then able to actually transfer that water into something that is usable for humans. A bit of a topic link here. For our case study for our NEE country and the development topic, we were looking at Nigeria, and actually we were looking at Nigeria pretty much just up to Christmas before we went for the Christmas holiday. Now, this topic about water links in directly. I always like when things link in geography because I did some research, and 57 million people in Nigeria don't have access to safe water. Over 130 million, which is 2/3 of the population, don't have access to adequate sanitation. And about 60,000 children under 5 years old every year die from diarrheal diseases caused by poor water and poor sanitation. And this all links back to this idea that even though Nigeria is an NEE, they are still not able to afford the infrastructure to make sure that drinking water is clean for their population. And therefore, even though Nigeria might have access to the water, they currently, because of their economic status as an NE, not being amazingly wealthy, and because of their lack of infrastructure, therefore, they are struggling to convert that water into something that is actually safe for their population to drink. And in the meantime, they can't just not drink the water. What they have to do is have to drink dirty water. And if you were in my lesson, you would remember me banging on about that life straw. Now, the life straw was an example of an intermediate technology, and the life straw enables you to put that straw into any water. I showed you the video of them putting it in the toilet, and you can drink out of that straw, and it kills 99.9999% of the bacteria. So if you're in Nigeria and you can't afford these water treatment plants, providing some low-cost technology for people to use is obviously a better option than them drinking water that isn't safe. And I just want to make that link quite clear there, because I know sometimes in geography we forget to make them. So, with that in mind, hopefully that all made sense. As always, there are 3 review questions I'd like to answer now. So the first one is, using figures, describe which parts of the world are facing water stress and scarcity. So for that question, I'd like to go right the way back to this slide here. So if you can do me a description of kind of what's going on in the world, that would be really good. For the second question, explain how physical factors can cause water scarcity. Well, we looked at 3. And then the final question, explain how water pollution can lead to water scarcity. Okay, as always, I'd like to answer those questions and upload them onto Show My Homework so I can have a look through. Any questions, please ask.